the hot wind sweeps across the desert plains of southern Iraq, where the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia lie buried beneath layers of shifting sand. Here, thousands of years ago, the Sumerians etched a story into clay that challenges everything we believe about our origins. They speak of the Great Flood and kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years. But hidden within these cuneiform tablets is a more unsettling narrative. It is a chronicle of erasure. These texts suggest that we are not the first version of ourselves to walk the earth. They describe a cycle of creation and total destruction, where the gods grew weary of their biological masterwork and chose to wipe the slate clean. We look to the stars and wonder about our future, yet the answers may be buried in the dust. Perhaps humanity is not a single lineage, but a recurring echo. The sun hangs heavy over the scorched plains of southern Iraq. Here, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, the earth itself seems to breathe with the weight of antiquity. This is Mesopotamia, a land often called the cradle of civilization. For thousands of years, the shifting sands of the desert buried a secret that would eventually challenge the very foundations of how we understand our origins. This secret was not made of gold or precious stones, but of sun-dried clay. In the mid-19th century, a British explorer named Austen Henry Layard began to excavate the massive mounds of Nineveh. He was searching for the palaces of Assyrian kings, but what he found was something far more profound. He discovered a library. It was the lost library of King Ashurbanipal, containing tens of thousands of broken clay tablets covered in a strange, wedge-shaped script known as cuneiform. When these tablets were eventually translated in the damp, gas-lit rooms of the British Museum, they did not just reveal history. They revealed a memory of a time before time. They told of a world where humanity was not the first master of the earth. They spoke of a cycle of creation and destruction, a series of experimental blueprints for the human race that had been discarded by the powers that brought them into being. The scholars who first looked upon these texts were shocked. They were living in a Victorian world where the Book of Genesis was the definitive account of how the world began. Yet, here in these dusty tablets, they found a narrative that was thousands of years older and strikingly similar. But there was a darker, more complex layer to the Sumerian story. In the Sumerian account, the creation of humanity was not an act of divine love or a gift of life for its own sake. It was a matter of labor. The tablets known as the Atrahasis tell us that at the beginning of all things, the gods themselves had to work the earth. They dug the canals, they cleared the channels, and they toiled under the sun to make the land fertile. The senior gods, known as the Anunnaki, sat in luxury while the lesser gods, the Igigi, bore the heavy burden of the work. For 2,500 years, these lesser gods labored until their patience finally broke. They burned their tools and surrounded the palace of the high god Enlil in the middle of the night. To resolve the strike and prevent a cosmic civil war, the god Enki, the master of wisdom and water, proposed a radical solution. He suggested the creation of a worker, a being that could carry the yoke of the gods and allow the immortals to rest. This being was the Lulu, the first human. Enki combined the clay of the earth with the blood and the spirit of a sacrificed god. This was the first Genesis. But according to the tablets, this was not the version of humanity we see in the mirror today. This was a prototype. These first humans were successful beyond measure. They were fertile and they were resilient. They multiplied across the landscape of Mesopotamia, building cities and tilling the soil. But their success became their undoing. The world became crowded. The noise of millions of humans rose into the heavens, preventing the god Enlil from sleeping. Enlil was not a benevolent creator. He was an aristocrat who valued his peace and quiet above the lives of his servants. He decided that the human experiment had become too loud, too chaotic, and too numerous. He decided it was time to erase them. This first attempt at erasure was not the flood. The tablets tell us that Enlil first sent a plague to thin the ranks of the humans. But the god Enki, who had a secret affection for his creations, whispered a warning to a man named Atrahasis. He told the people how to appease the gods and stop the plague. When that failed to wipe them out, Enlil sent a drought. For years, the rains did not fall, and the earth became hard as iron. The people starved, but once again, they found a way to survive through the secret guidance of Enki. Each time the gods tried to reset the world, humanity clung to existence. The tablets suggest that these early versions of humans were different from us. They lived for vast periods of time. They were perhaps more hardy, more deeply connected to the divine spark that had been mixed into their clay. But they were also seen as disposable. They were a draft of a poem that the author kept trying to crumple up and throw away. One of the most enigmatic documents found in the ruins of the ancient Near East is the Sumerian king list. This is a list of monarchs who ruled over the land before and after a great catastrophic flood. What makes this list so unsettling to modern historians is the sheer scale of the reigns recorded. The list begins with a simple statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. After him, Alanger ruled for 36,000 years. These numbers seem impossible. They defy our biological reality. Yet, the Sumerian scribes recorded them with the same matter-of-fact tone they used to record the price of grain or the taxes of a merchant. The list describes 8 kings who ruled for a combined total of over 241,000 years. These were the kings of the era before the flood, the era of the first humanity. Were these first humans a different species? Were they the product of a biological engineering project that gave them longevity we can only dream of? The Sumerian tablets do not speak in metaphors. They speak in technical details. They describe the gods as physical beings who lived among the people, who felt hunger, anger, and fatigue. When we look at the king list, we see a clear dividing line. There are the kings who ruled before the flood, whose reigns lasted tens of thousands of years. Then there is the flood, the ultimate erasure. After the waters recede, the kingship descends from heaven once again, but the reigns of the kings become much shorter. They drop from thousands of years to hundreds of years, and eventually to the normal lifespans we recognize today. It is as if the creators, frustrated by the resilience and the noise of the first humanity, decided to throttle the engine of human life. They rebuilt us, but they made us smaller, weaker, and more temporary. The physical evidence of this erasure is not found only in the texts. In the early 20th century, archaeologists like Leonard Woolley began to dig deep beneath the foundations of ancient Sumerian cities like Ur. As they dug through layers of pottery, bricks, and household items, they reached a point where the evidence of civilization simply stopped. Below the oldest city streets, they found a massive layer of clean, water-laid silt. It was over 8 feet thick in some places. This was not the result of a local river overflowing. It was the signature of a cataclysm. Below that layer of silt, they found the remains of an even older culture, one that was distinct from the Sumerians who lived above the mud. It was the Abade culture. These people had their own tools, their own art, and their own mystery. To the Sumerians, these were the people of the time before. These were the ones who were erased. We have to wonder what was lost in that silence. If the Sumerian tablets are a true record of a forgotten memory, then we are living in the ruins of a much larger story. We are the version of humanity that was designed to be quiet. We were made to have short lives so that we could not accumulate enough power or knowledge to challenge the gods. We were made to be manageable, but the echoes of that first Genesis remain. They are found in the strange gaps in our fossil record. They are found in the sudden, unexplained leap in human intelligence and culture that occurred 6,000 years ago. Most of all, they are found in our collective subconscious. Almost every culture on Earth has a myth of a golden age followed by a great destruction. We have stories of giants, of long-lived heroes, and of a time when the heavens were closer to the earth. The Sumerian tablets suggest that these are not just stories. They are the redacted files of our species. The gods did not just create us. They edited us. They tried to delete us, and when that did not work, they modified the code. As we look at the cuneiform signs etched into the clay, we are looking at the oldest evidence of a celestial bureaucracy. We see the minutes of meetings where our fate was debated. We see the blueprints of our ancestors, and we are forced to ask a haunting question. If humanity has been created and erased before, what makes us think that we are the final version? The desert of Iraq holds the answer in its silent, sandy embrace. The tablets tell us that we are the descendants of survivors, the ones who were not supposed to be here. We are the echo of a first Genesis that was meant to be forgotten. But the earth does not forget. It holds the layers of our previous selves, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to find the truth of who we were before the world was washed clean. We are not the first. We are simply the ones who are currently here, walking over the graves of a humanity that was once much more than we are allowed to be. This is the story of the Erasure, a story written in the stars and buried in the mud of Mesopotamia. It is a story that suggests our beginning was not a start, but a restart. And in that realization, the entire history of our species begins to shift into a new, more mysterious light. The sun-baked plains of southern Iraq hold secrets buried beneath layers of silt and the weight of 5,000 years. Here, in the ruins of cities like Nippur, Sippar, and Shuruppak, archaeologists have unearthed tens of thousands of clay tablets. These are not merely administrative records or lists of grain harvests. They are the oldest written memories of our species. When the wedge-shaped cuneiform script is translated, it speaks of a time before history, a time when the world was managed by those the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. But these texts do not describe a perfect, instantaneous creation of man. Instead, they tell a far more unsettling story. They describe a process of trial and error. They describe the prototypes. To understand the Sumerian perspective, one must first look at the state of the world before humanity existed. The tablets, specifically those containing the Atrahasis epic and the myth of Enki and Ninmah, describe a hierarchy of divine beings. At the top were the Anunnaki, the great gods who decreed the fates. Below them were the Igigi, a class of lesser deities tasked with the backbreaking labor of maintaining the earth. For 2,500 years, the Igigi toiled. They dug the beds of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They cleared the canals that brought life to the soil. They labored under a sun that did not yet shine on a single human face. The texts tell us that the Igigi eventually reached a breaking point. They burned their tools and surrounded the palace of Enlil, the lord of the air, demanding an end to their servitude. The tension was absolute. A conflict between the heavens and the earth seemed inevitable. It was in this moment of crisis that Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and craft, proposed a radical solution. He suggested the creation of a substitute. He proposed a biological machine capable of carrying the basket of the gods. He proposed the Lulu, but the creation of the Lulu was not a simple act of magic. The Sumerian tablets describe it as a laboratory process. Enki did not work alone. He sought the help of Ninmah, the mother goddess and master of the womb. The instructions found in the tablets are remarkably specific. Enki tells Ninmah to mix the clay of the earth with the blood and the intellect of a sacrificed god. This mixture, this essence, was to be placed into the wombs of birth goddesses. The cinematic scale of this scene is hard to overstate. Imagine the dark, damp chambers of the Abzu, Enki's subterranean realm. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and copper. There are vessels of clay and fluids. This is the Shimti, the house where the breath of life is fashioned. But as the tablets recount, the first attempts were far from successful. This is the part of the story often left out of modern mythologies. There was not one single creation of man, but a series of iterations, many of which were deemed failures and discarded. As Enki and Ninmah began their work, they were said to have become intoxicated during a great feast. In this state of divine revelry, Ninmah challenged Enki, claiming she could make the human body better or worse as she saw fit. She began to fashion beings from the clay, but her hands were unsteady. The first prototype she created had hands that could not grip. He was a being incapable of labor, the very purpose for which he was designed. Enki did not destroy the creature. Instead, he found a place for it in the social order, decreeing that it should serve the king. Ninmah tried again. She fashioned a being who was blind. Again, Enki provided a fate for this version of humanity, suggesting that the blind man could excel in the art of music. She fashioned a being with weak legs, a being who could not hold back his urine, and a being who was neither male nor female. In each instance, these prototypes represented a deviation from the desired design. They were living, breathing biological entities, but they were not yet the finished product. The tablets describe these early versions of humanity with a cold, almost clinical observation. There is no moral judgment passed upon them, only the realization that they did not meet the requirements of the gods. The Sumerian word for these beings suggests a state of incompleteness. They were the erased ones, the versions of our species that the earth eventually swallowed back into the dust. The dialogue between Enki and Ninmah becomes increasingly tense as the experiments continue. Enki, seeing the struggles of the mother goddess, decides to take his turn at the creation. He attempts to fashion a being that he believes will be superior, but the result is even more tragic. He creates a creature called Yumul, a being so frail and afflicted that it cannot even sit up or feed itself. It is a creature of constant suffering, a biological dead end. This exchange in the ancient text serves a profound purpose. It suggests that the path to our current form was paved with biological wreckage. It implies that the Anunnaki were not infallible creators, but rather cosmic engineers working with materials they did not fully control. The clay they used was not just dirt, but a metaphor for the genetic substrate of the planet. The blood of the god was the spark of consciousness, or perhaps a specific code that needed to be integrated into the terrestrial life already present. If we view these tablets through a modern lens, the description of the prototypes begins to look like a record of genetic experimentation. The ancient scribes, lacking the vocabulary for DNA or synthetic biology, used the language of their time. They spoke of clay, blood, and breath, but the concept remains the same. The creation of humanity was an iterative process of trial and error. The The tablets imply that there were entire eras dominated by these earlier versions of humanity. These were the eras before the Great Flood, a time when the boundaries between the divine and the mortal were blurred. Some researchers suggest that the various hominid species found in the fossil record, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and others, might be the physical remnants of these prototypes. From the Sumerian perspective, these were not simply ancestors who evolved. They were the biological drafts that the gods discarded in their search for the perfect servant. Eventually, the collaboration between Enki and Ninmah reached a breakthrough. They produced the Lulu Amalu, the perfected worker. This being was strong enough to labor in the mines, intelligent enough to follow complex instructions, and capable of reproducing itself. This was the first true human in the image of the gods. This version was granted the capacity for language and the ability to organize into societies. But even this success came with a hidden cost. The tablets suggest that while the Lulu Amalu was a triumph of engineering, it was also a source of great anxiety for the Anunnaki. As the human population grew, their noise began to disturb the sleep of Enlil. The very workers created to solve a problem became a problem themselves. The gods began to realize that they had created something with a will of its own, something that carried the blood of a god within a body of clay. This leads us to the most unsettling question posed by the Sumerian records. If humanity was created through a process of iteration and erasure, how many times has that erasure occurred? The prototypes were not just individuals, they were entire lineages that were allowed to wither away or were actively removed from the record. The Great Flood, which appears in almost every ancient tradition, is described in the Sumerian texts as the ultimate erasure. It was a deliberate act by the god Enlil to wipe the slate clean and start again. When we look at the ruins of the ancient world, we are looking at the remnants of the final version. But beneath the foundations of the oldest temples, in the deepest strata of the earth, there may be traces of the ones who came before. The clay prototypes are a reminder that in the eyes of the ancient gods, humanity was not a sacred creation, but a functional one. We were a solution to a labor crisis, a biological experiment that succeeded beyond the expectations of its creators. The tablets leave us with a sense of precariousness. If we are the result of the fifth or sixth attempt at a human being, what happened to the souls of those who were discarded? Do they linger in our genetic memory? The Sumerians believed that the past was never truly gone. It was merely buried, waiting for the wind to shift and the sand to reveal the face of a prototype that was once called man. As the sun sets over the Iraqi desert, the long shadows of the mounds seem to take the shape of those forgotten beings, the erased ones who lived and breathed long before the first word of our history was ever written. The narrative of the clay prototypes shifts our understanding of human origins from a linear progression to a chaotic workshop of divine ambition. It suggests that our existence is not a guarantee, but a result of a specific set of circumstances that could have easily gone another way. The Sumerian tablets do not just tell us who we are. They remind us of who we might have been and who we replaced. The history of humanity is not a single story, but a series of layers, each one built upon the erasure of the one that came before. And in those layers, the silent voices of the prototypes still speak, warning us that the hand that fashions the clay is the same hand that can return it to the earth. The desert sands of southern Iraq do not merely hide ruins. They hide the memory of a blueprint. Here, on thousands of tablets of baked clay, the scribes of Sumer recorded a history that challenges the very linear nature of our existence. These texts do not describe a single moment of creation. Instead, they whisper of a laboratory. They speak of a process where divinity and biology intersect, and where the architects of our species were as quick to destroy as they were to design. When we look closely at the Atrahasis epic and the Enuma Elish, we find a disturbing narrative of trial and error. We find evidence that we are not the first. We are simply the latest. In the Sumerian worldview, the gods are not distant spirits. They are the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. They are depicted as physical beings with tangible needs, complex emotions, and a cold, pragmatic approach to the management of the planet. To them, the earth is a resource and life is a tool. The texts describe a time when the lesser gods, the Igigi, grew weary of their labor. They were the ones digging the canals, tilling the soil, and mining the riches of the earth. When they eventually revolted, burning their tools in the darkness of the Mesopotamian night, the senior architects faced a crisis of labor. Their solution was not to perform a miracle of light, but to embark on a project of genetic engineering. This is where the concept of the celestial architect takes on a clinical, almost terrifying dimension. The tablets describe Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and Nintu, the mother goddess, working together to fashion a worker. But the process is not depicted as a perfect, instantaneous success. The Sumerian accounts are unique among ancient creation myths because they explicitly mention the failures. They detail the prototypes that did not work. There are descriptions of beings who could not sit, beings who could not see, and beings who were unable to reproduce. These were not demons or monsters in the traditional sense. They were unsuccessful iterations. They were versions of humanity that the architects deemed non-viable. The tablets tell us that these early models were cast aside. They were the first to experience the silent erasure. As we walk through the halls of modern genetics, we recognize the language of these ancient scribes. They speak of the mixing of the blood of a slain god with the clay of the earth. In a modern documentary context, we might interpret this as the infusion of a sophisticated genetic code into a primitive hominid host. The goal was simple: to create a being capable of speech, capable of labor, and capable of worship. However, the architects were not looking for an equal. They were looking for a servant. But the architects were not a unified front. The Sumerian records are defined by the tension between two brothers, Enki, the creator, and Enlil, the lord of the air and the supreme commander of the earth. If Enki is the architect who designs, Enlil is the eraser who cleans the slate. This duality is central to the mystery of our missing history. The texts suggest that once humanity was successfully established, we began to thrive at a rate that the senior gods found alarming. We were too successful. We were too loud. The Atrahasis epic describes a period of 1,200 years between iterations of humanity. During this time, the population of the earth multiplied. The clamor of mankind became so great that it reached the heavens. To Enlil, the noise was more than a nuisance. It was a sign of a loss of control. The humans were no longer just servants. They were a force of nature that threatened the peace of the gods. The response from the celestial command was not a lecture or a new set of laws. It was a series of systematic attempts at erasure. First came the plague. The tablets describe a thinning of the ranks, a culling of the human population intended to restore silence to the earth. But Enki, the architect who had invested his own essence into the project, could not stand to see his work destroyed. He intervened, teaching his chosen humans how to survive, how to pray, and how to appease the specific gods responsible for the pestilence. The erasure failed. Enlil grew more frustrated. He ordered a second erasure, this time through famine. He commanded the heavens to withhold their rain and the earth to withhold its bounty. For years, the humans suffered. The texts paint a harrowing picture of a society collapsing under the weight of starvation. Yet, once again, Enki found a way to bypass the restrictions. He allowed the hidden waters of the deep to nourish the crops. He showed the humans how to fish the seas when the fields were dry. The human experiment continued, surviving through the clandestine aid of its creator. This cycle of creation and attempted erasure suggests that humanity has existed in a state of perpetual fragility. We are a species with amnesia, largely because the records of these previous iterations were wiped away by the very beings who made us. The tension reached its breaking point with the decision to send the Great Flood. This was not a natural disaster in the Sumerian view. It was a deliberate legal decision made by the assembly of the gods. It was the ultimate erasure. The tablets tell us that Enlil made the other gods swear an oath of silence. They were to let the floodwaters wash the earth clean of the human noise once and for all. No one was to be warned. No one was to be saved. The celestial architects had decided that the experiment had failed, or perhaps that it had become too dangerous to continue. The slate was to be wiped blank, returning the earth to the silent, pristine state it held before the first clay was fashioned. Yet we are here. Our presence is the proof that the erasure was incomplete. Enki, ever the defiant engineer, broke his oath. He did not speak directly to a human, but he whispered to the wall of a reed hut where his favorite servant, Ziusadra, slept. He spoke to the wall, knowing the man would hear. He gave the instructions for the construction of a vessel, a preserved capsule of genetic and cultural information that would survive the coming storm. When the waters receded and the gods looked down upon a devastated world, they found a remnant. The fury of Enlil was met with the cold logic of Enki. The architect argued that if humanity were destroyed, there would be no one to tend the earth or offer the sacrifices that the gods themselves had come to rely upon. Compromise was reached. Humanity would be allowed to exist, but with new limitations. Our lifespans were shortened. Our fertility was regulated. We were made more manageable, more prone to forgetfulness, and less likely to challenge the silence of the heavens. This narrative forces us to ask, how many times has this happened? If the Sumerian tablets are a record of the third or fourth iteration of humanity, what lies beneath the layers of the flood silt? When archaeologists find anomalies in the fossil record, or structures that seem to defy the technological capabilities of their supposed era, are we looking at the leftovers of a previous version? Are the myths of fallen giants and ancient heroes actually the garbled memories of the prototypes that came before the Great Erasure? The concept of the silent eraser is perhaps the most chilling aspect of our hidden history. It suggests that our progress as a civilization is not a straight line, but a series of circles. We build, we grow, we become loud, and then the architects decide it is time to start over. The silence of the universe might not be because there is no one out there, but because the architects are waiting to see if this current version of humanity will eventually require the same erasure as the ones that preceded it. As we look at the ruins of Ur and Eridu, we are not just looking at the birth of civilization. We are looking at the site of a cosmic negotiation. We are the survivors of a divine disagreement. The celestial architects left us their stories on these tablets so that we might understand our place in the hierarchy of the world. But in doing so, they also left us a warning. The hand that fashions the clay is governed by a mind that values order above all else. And in the eyes of the erasers, the greatest threat to order is the unpredictable noise of a species that has forgotten its origins. We live in the shadow of these architects. Our cities are built on the dust of the erased. Our languages carry the echoes of the commands given to our ancestors in the reed huts of the marshes. We are the result of 1,000 revisions, a biological manuscript that has been edited and redacted over eons. The question that remains is whether we are the final version, or if the architects are already preparing the next blank slate. The tablets are silent on this point, leaving us to wonder if the next erasure will be as sudden and as total as the ones that turned our predecessors into myths. We are a work in progress, living on borrowed time in a world that has been reset more times than we dare to imagine. The sky over ancient Mesopotamia does not simply turn gray. It bruises. In the ancient Sumerian accounts, the end of the world does not begin with a moral failing or a lapse in faith. It begins with a complaint about noise. We find ourselves looking at the clay tablets of the Atrahasis and the Eridugenesis, where the narrative of the Great Flood takes on a chillingly administrative tone. The gods are not angry because humanity is evil. They are irritated because humanity is too successful. The world is crowded. The clamor of millions of human beings rises like a physical weight into the heavens, disturbing the sleep of Enlil, the lord of the air and the king of the gods. To Enlil, the human race is a failed experiment that has become a nuisance. He views the biological sprawl of cities and the relentless hum of human industry as a defect in the system. The decision he reaches is not one of emotional vengeance, but of systemic termination. He calls for a cosmic reset. He calls for the deluge. In this documentary view of the past, the flood is not a natural disaster, but a controlled demolition of a global population. It is the moment when the creators decide that the current version of humanity is no longer worth the maintenance. The tablets describe a secret assembly of the gods where the decree is finalized. It is a closed-door meeting where the fate of every living thing is sealed. This is where we see the first cracks in the divine hierarchy. Enki, the god of wisdom and the original architect of the human form, remains secretly invested in his creation. He is the whistleblower in the halls of the gods. He cannot openly defy the decree of Enlil, so he resorts to a technicality. He travels to the city of Shuruppak and speaks to a wall. He whispers the secrets of the coming catastrophe to the reed walls of a hut, knowing that the man inside Zayusadra is listening on the other side. The instructions are precise. Zayusadra is told to tear down his house and build a boat. He is told to abandon his possessions and save life itself. The Sumerian accounts do not present this as a simple wooden ark. They describe a massive, multi-leveled cube, a vessel designed with mathematical precision to survive the unmaking of the world. As Zayusadra works, the rest of the world continues in blissful ignorance. The noise that so annoyed Enlil continues right up until the moment the sky breaks open. The description of the storm in these ancient texts is far more violent and terrifying than the versions found in later traditions. It is not merely rain. It is a total collapse of the atmospheric and subterranean boundaries. The tablets tell us that the Anunnaki themselves are terrified by the scale of the destruction they have unleashed. They crouch like dogs against the walls of their celestial abode, watching as the earth is dissolved into a gray soup of mud and debris. The goddess Ninhursag, who helped mold the first humans from clay, weeps as she sees her children filling the sea like dragonflies. For 7 days and 7 nights, the world is scrubbed clean. This is the cosmic reset in its most literal form. The cities are erased. The libraries are turned to silt. The genetic lines are severed. When the sun finally breaks through the clouds on the 8th day, the world is unrecognizable. Zayusadra emerges from his vessel into a landscape of silence. The noise is gone. Enlil has achieved his quiet, but it is the quiet of a graveyard. As we examine the archaeological record, we find layers of silt in the Mesopotamian valley that suggest massive flooding events occurred repeatedly in the distant past. But the Sumerian tablets suggest something deeper than a local river flood. They suggest a cycle. The deluge was the moment the gods realized that humanity was too resilient to be completely erased, yet too dangerous to be left unchecked. When Enlil discovers that Ziusudra has survived, his initial fury is met with a sobering reality presented by Enki. The gods are hungry. Without humans to provide offerings and labor, the gods themselves suffer. This leads to a chilling compromise that defines the human condition from that point forward. The creators realize they cannot simply delete humanity every time the population grows too large. Instead, they decide to build limitations directly into the human code. Before the flood, the Sumerian king list records monarchs who reigned for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, human lifespans begin to plummet. The gods introduce new biological constraints. They create the concept of barrenness. They introduce infant mortality. They shorten the years of a man's life so that the noise of the human race can never again reach a level that threatens the peace of the heavens. This is the birth of our modern reality. We are the survivors of a managed extinction, living in a world where our very biology has been throttled to prevent us from becoming a threat to the order of things. The Great Flood was the laboratory where the creators learned how to manage their creation through scarcity and death. It was the transition from the golden age of limitless potential to the iron age of survival. The Sumerian account forces us to ask if our current civilization is simply another iteration waiting for the next reset. If the gods, or whoever these ancient architects were, viewed humanity as a resource rather than a partner, then the flood was merely a maintenance cycle. It was a way to thin the herd and refine the product. We see this reflected in the way Ziusudra is treated after the waters recede. He is granted immortality and taken to the land of Dilmun, the dwelling place of the gods, but he is the last of his kind. The humanity that follows him is different. It is smaller, shorter-lived, and more easily controlled. The landscape of the post-deluge world is a world of ghosts. Every city built after the flood was constructed on the bones of a previous version of ourselves. The Sumerians were obsessed with this idea of the antediluvian world, the world before the flood. They looked back at those lost millennia as a time of giants and incredible longevity, a time when the boundaries between heaven and earth were thin. By recording these stories on clay, they were trying to preserve a memory of a time before the reset, a time when humanity was something more than a subservient workforce. As we look at the ruins of Eridu and Ur, we are looking at the second or third draft of a civilization. The tablets suggest that the erasure was nearly perfect. Only through the intervention of a sympathetic creator did any trace of the previous world survive. This creates a haunting perspective on our own history. We measure our progress in centuries and millennia, but the Sumerian record suggests we should be thinking in terms of epics and erasures. The story of the flood is often told as a story of hope and salvation, centered on the survival of a few. But in the Sumerian documentary of events, it is a story of a narrowed horizon. It is the moment the creators put a ceiling on human potential. They realized that a being with an infinite lifespan and an ever-growing population would eventually challenge the gods themselves. To prevent this, they broke the world and put it back together with new rules. The deluge as a cosmic reset tells us that we are a species with amnesia because that amnesia was intentional. We were meant to forget the world that came before. We were meant to focus on the struggle of the present, on the labor of the fields and the building of temples, too busy with our short lives to wonder about the giants who walked the earth before the clouds turned black. We are the descendants of the survivors, but we are also the products of a divine pruning. If we accept this narrative, then the history of humanity is not a straight line of progress. It is a series of peaks and valleys, where every time we reach too high or become too loud, the system triggers a response. The Sumerian tablets stand as a warning and a witness. They tell us that the world has been silent before, and that the creators are capable of making it silent again. The noise of our modern world, our massive populations, and our technological clamor would surely be familiar to the Enlil of the ancient tablets. We are once again reaching a crescendo, and as we look at the ancient record, we have to wonder if the next reset is already being discussed in the silent halls of the architects who first molded us from the earth. The desert of southern Iraq is a place where the horizon dissolves into a shimmering haze of heat and dust. Here, beneath the parched surface of the earth, lie the remains of the world's first cities. To the modern eye, they are little more than mounds of broken mud brick and shattered pottery. But to the scribes of the ancient world, these were the seats of a power that predates the very concept of time as we understand it. We are looking at a record that challenges our entire definition of human history. This is the Sumerian king list. In the quiet galleries of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, there sits a four-sided clay prism. It is known as the Weld-Blundell prism, and its surface is crowded with neat rows of cuneiform script. It is a dry, bureaucratic document at first glance, a ledger of names and dates. Yet, as the eye follows the characters, the numbers begin to defy reason. The list begins with a statement that feels more like a cosmic decree than a historical note. It says that after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The narrator pauses as the camera moves over the ancient text. The first name on the list is Alulim. He did not rule for a decade or a generation. According to the stone, Alulim reigned for 28,800 years. He is followed by Alanger, who sat upon the throne for 36,000 years. These are not the lifespans of men. They are the lifespans of something else. In the Sumerian record, these 8 individuals, the antediluvian kings, ruled for a staggering total of 241,200 years. We find ourselves standing in the ruins of Eridu, the place where the Sumerians believed civilization began. The wind whistles through the gaps in the eroded ziggurat. If we take these records literally, we are looking at a history of humanity that has been stripped away. A history where the rulers were not merely mortals, but perhaps biological conduits for a different kind of existence. These kings presided over 5 cities: Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. They lived through epochs that would make the entire rise and fall of Rome look like a fleeting heartbeat. The question that haunts archaeologists and historians is why a culture as mathematically precise as the Sumerians would record such impossible numbers. These were the people who gave us the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle. They were master accountants and astronomers. They did not make mistakes of this magnitude by accident. If these numbers are not errors, then they are a code. Or perhaps they are a literal description of an era that was never meant to be remembered by those who came after. The list continues, moving from city to city, until it reaches a sudden, chilling conclusion to the first epoch. Simply reads, "Then the flood swept over." In this moment, the narrative of the king list shifts. The tone of the document changes from the eternal to the temporal. After the flood, the kingship is once again lowered from heaven, but this time, the reigns begin to shrink. We see rulers who live for 900 years, then 600, Then eventually, as we reach the historical figures we can verify, the rains drop to the familiar span of 20 or 30 years. The flood is not just a geological event in these texts. It is a biological and structural reset. It is the point where the giants of the past were erased to make room for the humanity we recognize today. Consider the city of Shuruppak. It is the last of the 5 pre-flood cities mentioned in the list. In the early 20th century, excavations led by archaeologists like Leonard Woolley and Stephen Langdon uncovered something startling beneath the layers of Sumerian habitation. They found a massive deposit of clean, water-laid silt. It was several feet thick, containing no artifacts, no pottery, and no signs of life. Below this silt layer lay the remains of a much older civilization, one that used different tools and different styles of pottery. It was as if the world had been scrubbed clean. If we look at the antediluvian kings through the lens of a multiple creation theory, they represent the first version of the human experiment. These were the prototypes, or perhaps the architects themselves, living in a world where the laws of biology were fundamentally different. In the Sumerian myths, these kings were often associated with the Apkallu, the 7 sages who brought the arts of civilization to mankind. These sages are often depicted as strange, hybrid beings, wearing garments that resemble fish scales. They were not born of the earth, but emerged from the Abzu, the deep subterranean waters presided over by the god Enki. The record suggests that this first iteration of humanity was too successful or perhaps too loud. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods become frustrated because the humans have become numerous and their clamor prevents the divine from sleeping. The flood was not a natural disaster in the eyes of the Sumerians. It was a deliberate administrative decision. It was an erasure. The 8 kings who ruled for hundreds of thousands of years were the remnants of that first great cycle. They were the ghosts of a golden age that was deemed too dangerous or too chaotic to continue. We walk through the mounds of Bad Tibra today and see nothing but dust. Yet, this was once the city of the wall of the metalworker. The king list tells us that Enmen-Lu-Ana ruled here for 43,000 years. If we allow ourselves to imagine the scale of such a life, we begin to see a different picture of our planet. Imagine a being who could watch the slow drift of the stars, who could see the climate change and the forests grow and die, all within a single lifetime. Such a being would not view the world as we do. To them, the short-lived humans who came after the flood would look like mayflies, born and dead in a single afternoon. The transition from the antediluvian kings to the post-flood rulers is the most critical moment in the ancient record. It marks the point where the divine and the mortal were separated. The gods withdrew, the lifespans shortened, and the memory of the first creation began to fade into myth. But the Sumerians refused to let it go completely. They etched the names of those eternal kings into stone, ensuring that even if their world was gone, their existence would remain a matter of record. The silence of the ruins is heavy with the weight of these lost millennia. We have been taught that civilization is a linear progression, starting from humble hunter-gatherers and moving toward complexity. But the Sumerian king list offers a different, more unsettling trajectory. It suggests that we are the diminished survivors of a much grander past. It suggests that the kings who ruled before the flood were not fantasies, but the last survivors of a humanity that was closer to the source of creation. As the sun sets over the ruins of Shuruppak, casting long shadows across the sand, we have to consider the possibility that our history books are only the second volume of a much longer story. The first volume was written in the lifetimes of the antediluvian kings, in the 5 cities that were swept away by the water. Those kings were the custodians of a knowledge we no longer possess, and their staggering reigns are the only clues we have left to the scale of what was lost. We are living in the shadow of these giants. Every time we build a city, every time we write a law, we are echoing the patterns established in Erasure hundreds of thousands of years ago. The ghosts of the antediluvian kings are not gone. They are woven into the very fabric of our civilization, reminding us that we were once something more. They stand at the edge of our memory, watching us from across the great divide of the flood, waiting to see if this version of humanity will fare any better than the last. The record remains, carved in clay and buried in the silt, a testament to a time when the kingship was eternal and the world was new. And as we look at the broken ziggurats, we realize that the erasure was almost complete, but not quite. The names remain, and the names are a haunting reminder of the first time we were here. The desert of southern Iraq is a landscape of ghosts. To the untrained eye, the horizon is a flat, shimmering expanse of heat and dust. But beneath the feet of the traveler lies a vertical graveyard of entire worlds. This is the sifting of memory, a process where time acts as a sieve, allowing the soft and the temporary to fall away while the hard and the heavy remain trapped in the silt. Archaeologists call these mounds tells. They are not natural hills. They are the compressed remains of thousands of years of human habitation, layered like the rings of a tree. Yet, when we look at the Sumerian records, we find a terrifying suggestion. These layers do not represent a continuous climb from primitive to complex. Instead, they represent a series of sudden stops and violent restarts. The Sumerians were obsessed with what they called the time before. They believed that their civilization was not the first attempt at order, but rather a recovery effort. In their view, history is not a straight line. It is a cycle of divine intervention and catastrophic erasure. When we examine the cuneiform tablets, we see a recurring theme of the gods becoming weary of their creation. The reasons given for these erasures are often chillingly mundane. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the god Enlil cannot sleep because the clamor of humanity has grown too loud. The world is overpopulated, the noise is unbearable, and the solution is a total cleansing of the slate. This concept of the sifting of memory suggests that we are living in a house built upon the ruins of a much older, much more mysterious mansion. If the Sumerian accounts are taken literally, we must ask what happened to the versions of humanity that came before. Where are the tools they used? Where are the cities they built? The answer may lie in the very nature of our planet. Earth is a restless machine. It grinds stone into sand and pulls continents beneath the crust. Over the course of tens of thousands of years, a city of steel and glass would be reduced to a thin layer of oxidized iron and crushed quartz. If a civilization existed 50,000 or 100,000 years ago, the natural sifting process of the earth would have removed almost every trace of its existence. What remains are the anomalies. We find oddities in the fossil record and strange metallic spheres in deep rock strata that do not fit the established timeline. These are the stones that the sieve could not catch. In the Sumerian mindset, these anomalies were not mistakes of nature. They were the leftovers of the previous iterations. The tablets describe how the gods, after each destruction, would begin again with a refined design. Perhaps the first humans were too large, the second too long-lived, and the third too rebellious. With each pass through the sieve, the creators adjusted the parameters of the human soul and the human body. The sifting of memory is also a psychological phenomenon. We see it in the way myths are structured across the globe. From the Americas to the Far East, the story of a great flood and a lost golden age is universal. It is as if a collective memory of erasure is hardwired into the human consciousness. We carry the trauma of a previous ending in our very DNA. The Sumerians did not view these stories as metaphors. They viewed them as the legal history of their species. To them, the king list was a ledger of survival. It recorded who held the power before the waters rose and who was granted the authority to rebuild once the mud dried. There is a profound sadness in the way the Sumerian scribes describe the loss of knowledge. They speak of the antediluvian cities like Eridu and Bad Tibra as places where the secrets of the cosmos were once common knowledge. After the Erasure, these secrets became the property of the gods alone, or were hidden in deep vaults beneath the earth. This implies that the sifting of memory was intentional. It was not just nature taking its course, but a deliberate removal of the tools that made humanity dangerous to their creators. Each time we were reset, we were made smaller, shorter-lived, and more dependent on the whims of the heavens. We must consider the possibility that we are currently in the midst of our own sifting process. We live in an era of digital information, where our entire history is stored in fragile pulses of electricity. If our civilization were to end tomorrow, how much of our memory would survive the next 10,000 years? Our books would rot. Our hard drives would demagnetize. Our concrete would crumble into dust. Future explorers might find the remnants of our largest dams or the radioactive signatures of our nuclear waste, but the essence of who we were would be lost. We would become just another layer in the tell, a curious anomaly for the next iteration of humanity to ponder. The Sumerian tablets warn us that the memory of the past is a fragile thing. It must be actively maintained, or it will be reclaimed by the silence of the earth. The scribes who pressed their reeds into wet clay were engaged in a desperate act of preservation. They were trying to reach across the void of the erasure to tell us that we have been here before. They wanted us to know that the gods are fickle and that the peace we enjoy is merely an intermission between the siftings. When we look at the ruins of Ur or Uruk, we are looking at the efforts of a people who were terrified of forgetting. Their architecture was massive, designed to withstand the elements for eons. Their writing was etched into stone and baked clay, the most durable mediums available to them. They were building against the clock, knowing that eventually, the noise of humanity would once again grow too loud for the gods to bear. The sifting of memory is the primary mechanism of our existence. It ensures that each new version of humanity starts from zero, unaware of the failures and the triumphs of those who stood on the same ground before them. This lack of institutional memory makes us easy to manage. Without a clear understanding of our origins or our previous capabilities, we are forced to accept the world as it is presented to us. We do not question the limitations of our lifespan or the scarcity of our resources because we have no memory of a time when things were different. But the Sumerian tablets act as a crack in the wall. They offer a glimpse into the previous rooms of the house. They suggest that the human spirit is a recurring flame, one that has been extinguished and relit many times over. The sifting of memory also explains the sudden appearance of high civilization in the archaeological record. The standard historical model struggles to explain how humanity went from hunter-gatherers to master builders of megalithic structures in such a short window of time. But if we consider the Sumerian perspective, it makes perfect sense. It was not an evolution, but a re-inheritance. The knowledge was not invented. It was remembered or returned. The first cities of Sumer were built on the exact locations where the pre-flood cities had stood. The foundations were already there, waiting in the dirt. The sifting had removed the people, but the sacred geography remained. As we move deeper into the mysteries of our own planet, we find that the Earth is much older than our written history. We find that the conditions for life have been present for hundreds of millions of years. In that vast ocean of time, a few thousand years of recorded history is a mere drop. The sifting of memory allows for the possibility of dozens of civilizations that could have risen to heights equal to or greater than our own, only to be ground back into the dust by the slow, turning wheels of the earth. We are the inheritors of a world that has been lived in, used, and discarded many times. The Sumerians left us a map of this cycle. They showed us that the sifting is not just a physical event, but a spiritual one. It is a test of what can endure. Only the most essential truths, the most profound stories, and the most durable stones survive the filter of time. Everything else is chaff, blown away by the wind. As we stand in the present moment, we are the current occupants of the stage, performing our roles with the same intensity as those who came before us. We believe our works are eternal, but the sifting of memory is already beginning. The sand is already starting to cover our tracks, preparing the ground for whoever, or whatever, comes next. The tablets remain as our only witness, a haunting reminder that to be human is to be part of a story that has no beginning and a recurring end. We are the echoes of a lost song, trying to remember the melody before the silence returns once more. The world that follows a total erasure is not a blank canvas but a graveyard of echoes. In the wake of the cataclysm described in the oldest Sumerian texts, the landscape is transformed into a desolate expanse of mud and silence. The previous experiment, the first iteration of what we might call humanity, has been swept away. Whether by water, fire, or a deliberate withdrawal of the life force, the first version of our kind is gone. But according to the cuneiform tablets, the architects of this world were not finished. They were not ready to leave the earth a barren rock. They look upon the ruins of their first creation and decide to refine the design. This marks the transition into what the tablets suggest is version 2.0, the human being we recognize in the mirror today. The Sumerian account of this second beginning is found within the Atrahasis epic and the Enuma Elish. It describes a divine assembly where the decision to recreate humanity is not met with universal joy, but with a cold, calculated necessity. The great Enlil, the lord of the air, had grown weary of the noise of the previous generation. He wanted silence. But Enki, the god of wisdom and subterranean waters, argued for a new model. This new version would be different. It would be more manageable, more limited, and perhaps most importantly, it would be designed with a built-in expiration date. In the house of Shimti, a place that modern researchers might equate to a laboratory, the tablets describe a process of mixing. There is a blending of clay and the blood of a sacrificed deity. The terminology used in the cuneiform is technical and strange. It speaks of the breath of life being infused into the biological matter through a series of 14 wombs. This was not a natural evolution from the dust. It was a reconstruction. The survivors of the previous age, the few who had hidden in the high places or been shielded by Enki himself, were now joined by a new mass-produced population. This second version of humanity was engineered to be the laborers of the gods, the keepers of the temples, and the tillers of the soil. But what makes version 2.0 distinct from its predecessor? The Sumerian king list provides a chilling clue. Before the Great Flood, the kings are said to have ruled for tens of thousands of years each. Alulim reigned for 28,800 years. And Menluana ruled for over 43,000 years. These numbers are often dismissed as mythological hyperbole, yet they are recorded with the same bureaucratic precision as the shorter reigns that follow. After the deluge, when the new version of humanity is established, the lifespans collapse. The reigns of kings drop from millennia to centuries, and eventually to the 70 years we know today. This drastic reduction suggests a deliberate modification. If version 1.0 was built for immortality or at least extreme longevity, version 2.0 was built for efficiency and rapid turnover. We became a species that lives fast and dies young, ensuring that we never have enough time to accumulate the kind of power or knowledge that might challenge our creators. The legacy of these survivors is a biological one. We carry within us the truncated code of a more grand ancestor, a ghost of a design that was once meant to span the ages. The survivors of the first erasure did not just leave behind their genetic material. They left behind a blueprint for civilization that appeared out of nowhere. This is the great mystery of Sumer. There is no clear archaeological evidence of a slow, agonizing transition from primitive hunter-gatherers to a sophisticated urban society. Instead, Sumerian culture emerges fully formed. They have complex mathematics based on the number 60, which we still use to measure our time and our circles. They have advanced astronomy, intricate legal codes, and a writing system that is as capable of recording poetry as it is of tracking grain shipments. It is as if the knowledge was handed back to the new version of humanity by those who remembered the world before. The tablets speak of the Abgal, or the seven sages, who emerged from the sea to teach the post-flood survivors the arts of civilization. These were the keepers of the me, the divine decrees that governed everything from the making of beer to the functions of kingship. These survivors were the bridge. They were the ones who carried the embers of the old world through the dark and used them to light the fires of the new one. We see the legacy of this second creation in the very structure of our cities. The Sumerians built ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that reached toward the heavens. These were not just temples. They were described as landing places, points of contact between the earthly realm and the divine. The architecture itself suggests a longing for the creators who had abandoned the physical world but remained in the celestial one. Every brick laid in the foundations of Uar and Eridu was a testament to the fact that we were not original to this place. We were a secondary installation, built to maintain a world that was no longer our own. The psychological legacy of version 2.0 is perhaps even more profound. Across every culture on Earth, there is a deep-seated memory of a lost golden age, a time when humans lived alongside gods and did not know the sting of mortality. This is not just a story we tell children. It is a fundamental part of the human psyche. We feel like we are missing something. We have a strange, inexplicable sense of displacement, as if we are refugees in our own bodies. This is the mark of a second-generation species. We are haunted by the capabilities of the version that came before us. The Sumerian tablets suggest that our ability to innovate, to build, and to wonder is a byproduct of the leftover essence used in our creation. We were meant to be simple workers, yet we possess a spark that the creators did not fully account for. This is the legacy of the survivors. They gave us the tools to survive in a harsh, post-cataclysmic world, but they also gave us the curiosity to look back at the ruins and ask who we really are. In the high deserts of the Middle East, the remnants of this story are still being unearthed. When archaeologists dig through the layers of silt left by ancient floods, they find more than just pottery shards. They find a chronological record of a species being rebooted. The shift in toolkits, the sudden appearance of organized agriculture, and the move toward urban centers all point to a directed evolution. We were guided out of the caves and into the cities, not by the slow hand of nature, but by the instruction of those who had survived the erasure. The survivors knew that the knowledge was fragile. They carved their stories into stone and clay, knowing that wood would rot and memory would fade. They left us the king list, the creation myths, and the star charts because they wanted us to know that we were the second act of a much longer play. They wanted us to understand that our existence is not a given, but a privilege granted by those who decided to try one more time. As we look at the ruins of these ancient cities, we are looking at the cradle of version 2.0. We are looking at the place where the legacy of the survivors was first codified. The ziggurats are silent now, and the voices of the Abgal have long since faded into the wind. But the structures remain. The mathematics remain. The very way we perceive the passing of the hours is a gift from a world that ended before ours began. We are the inheritors of a salvaged planet, walking through the corridors of a house built by ancestors we are told to forget. The legacy of version 2.0 is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when that spirit has been modified and constrained. We have taken the tools of our labor and used them to explore the stars. We have taken the limited lifespan we were given and filled it with a frantic, beautiful energy. But the shadow of the first version remains. It is there in our myths of giants, in our dreams of immortality, and in the nagging feeling that we were meant for something more than the toil of the fields. We are the children of the survivors, and we carry their trauma and their triumphs in our very DNA. The Sumerian tablets are not just historical records. They are the user manuals for a second iteration, a guide to understanding a world that was rebuilt from the scrap of a fallen empire. As we continue to decode the cuneiform and map our own genome, we are finally beginning to see the joins where the old world was welded to the new. We are learning that our history is not a straight line, but a series of beginnings and endings, and that we are currently living in the longest sustained version of the experiment. The question that remains is whether this version is the final one. The tablets suggest that erasure is a recurring theme, a cosmic reset button that is pressed when the noise becomes too great or the experiment veers off course. For now, we live in the legacy of the survivors, building our own monuments and writing our own stories, hoping that when the next silence falls, someone will be there to remember the melody of our era. We are version 2.0, the refined, the limited, and the resilient, standing on the shoulders of giants whose names have been scrubbed from the stars.